The sun was merciless over the Sonoran desert, a white blaze beating down on broken earth and rattlesnake rock. In that blistering heat, where even the cacti grew twisted from thirst, the lone figure of a rancher moved like a mirage on horseback. His name was Elias Dorn, a man worn raw by debt, drought, and a wife buried 2 winters ago beneath stones he still couldn't afford to chisel a name into. Elias wasn't out riding for glory or cattle. He was searching for water. His well had gone dry, and his livestock stood gaunt as ghosts under the skeletal shade of his barn. The land he once called home had turned cruel, but Elias knew cruel. He had survived the war back east and buried 3 brothers before he even knew how to swing a hammer. Now all he had left was his land, a one-eyed mule named Ginny, and the bitter grit of a man too stubborn to quit. Dust clawed at his throat as his horse staggered through the red canyons. He kept his eyes low and senses sharp. Vultures circled to the west, dark smudges against a blinding sky. Something was dead out there, or dying. He urged the horse toward it. The smell hit him first, burnt wood and something fouler like scorched hide and old fear. When the cabin came into view, it was already half swallowed by sand and smoke. The roof had caved in. Flames licked at what was left of the front door. He dismounted, heart racing, instincts firing. This wasn't his business. Folks out here died all the time, bandits, fever, starvation. But something about the scene froze his spine. Then he heard it, a cry. Weak. Human. A woman's voice. Elias charged through what remained of the threshold, ignoring the sting of heat on his boots. He found her near the hearth, chained to a post driven into the floorboards. Her arms were raw where the iron had bitten her wrist. The fire hadn't reached her yet, but the smoke had. Her eyes fluttered open, barely registering him. Blonde hair clung to her sweat-soaked face. She looked young, too young. Her lips were cracked. Blood crusted her temples. "Hold on," Elias rasped, kneeling beside her. He reached for the chain. It was thick, rusted iron. "No, they said I had to burn," she whispered. Her voice was smoke itself. "They said it was justice." Elias didn't ask who they were. He didn't waste time on comfort or promises. He took out his bowie knife and wedged it under the staple anchoring the chain to the floor, straining until the iron groaned loose. She collapsed into his arms, light as a heap of dry linen. The ride back nearly killed them both. His horse protested every mile, and Elias had to stop twice to wet her lips from his canteen, which was running dry. But the girl clung to life, barely, her breathing thin as parchment. By the time he reached his ranch, the sun was folding beneath the hills, bleeding gold across the sky. He carried her inside, his one-room shack with cracked walls and a bed barely fit for one. He placed her gently down, covered her with a wool blanket, and sat beside her all night, listening for breath. Every rise of her chest was a victory. She didn't wake until the second day. When she did, she screamed. Elias stepped back, palms raised. "Easy," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed with concern. "You're safe now. I ain't gonna hurt you." She stared at him through wild eyes, clutching the blanket to her collarbone. Her arms were still ringed with bruises, but her fire was returning. "Where am I?" "My ranch," he said simply. "About 30 miles south of Dry Fork. You were left to die in that cabin." The memory seemed to strike her like a blow. She flinched, eyes darting to the window as though the past might come crawling back in. Then she turned that gaze on him, sharp, mistrustful. "You should have left me," she said. "I don't make a habit of letting people burn," Elias replied. She said nothing for a long while. Then, softer, "My name's Clara." "Elias," he offered. She nodded once, then looked away. Clara didn't speak much after that. She spent the next few days sleeping in fits, waking only to sip broth Elias made from the last of his dried beef stock. He watched over her silently, keeping to his routine, feeding the mule, checking the fences, and returning each night to the quiet sound of her breathing. But she was never really asleep. Her eyes would flick open at the softest sound, shoulders tense, body curled protectively. On the fourth morning, she stood up. Her legs shook beneath her, but she held herself upright. Elias came in from tending the coop to find her gripping the edge of the table, glaring at him. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, setting down his gloves. "Figured you'd ask that sooner or later." "I don't have anything," she said. "No land. No family. No money. Whoever left me there might come back. You got nothing to gain." Elias leaned against the doorway, studying her. "I had a wife," he said after a long moment. "She died birthing our first. Never saw the boy's face. Buried her myself. After that, I stopped expecting to get anything back for doing right." Clara's mouth pressed into a line. "They called me a witch," she said finally. "Said I poisoned their water. That I cursed their fields. All because my father traded with the Apache and let me learn their ways. When he died, they chained me up in that cabin and told me the devil would take what was his." Her voice didn't tremble. It burned low, steady, and hard. Elias didn't flinch. "Well," he said, "the devil's gonna be sore when he finds out I stole you back." Clara's lip twitched. Almost a smile. After that, a rhythm settled in, not comfort, not yet, but motion. She helped him patch the coop, carried water from the well, cooked simple meals when her strength allowed. She didn't talk much, and neither did Elias, but there was a quiet language in the way she passed him tools or left a tin of coffee by the hearth before dawn. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch sharpening his knife, watching the wind pull dust across the flats. "Why do you stay out here?" she asked, voice soft in the dusk. "'Cause leaving's just another kind of dying," Elias said. Then added, "And maybe I was waiting." "For what?" He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd stood upright on his floor. "For something worth staying alive for." Clara looked away, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Her face was different now. Less hollow. Still wary, still scarred, but not broken. The desert hadn't spared her, but neither had it taken her fully. In that silence, something passed between them, unspoken but understood. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. But the storm hadn't passed. And in the distance, where the sand met the sky, something darker was stirring. Someone had left Clara to die. And someone, somewhere, wasn't finished. Not yet. The wind shifted on the sixth morning, hotter, heavier. Clara noticed it before Elias did. She stood in the garden plot, her hands sunk deep in dry soil, when she paused and lifted her head. The sky had gone hazy, the kind of haze that didn't come from heat alone. It was the kind that carried scent, ash, leather, and something bitter she hadn't smelled since the night the cabin was set ablaze. "They're coming," she said, almost to herself. Elias heard her from the porch. He didn't ask who. He only set down his coffee, and stepped inside to retrieve the rifle he kept beneath the floorboard. By midday, Clara had packed what little she owned, her father's flint-struck medicine bag, a small carving of a raven, and the faded shawl that still carried the scent of juniper and fire. She didn't ask to leave. She didn't offer goodbyes. But Elias watched her from the corral as she tied the sack tight and slung it over her shoulder. "You planning on walking back into hell?" he asked. "I can't drag you into it," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You didn't drag me into anything," he replied. "They did." She didn't want to believe him. But part of her did. They shared a meal that night, salt pork and beans, the last jar of pickled peppers from the cellar. Clara barely ate. Elias ate like a man preparing for war. Outside, the cicadas hummed louder than usual. Even Ginny, the mule, paced more than she rested. When the knock came, it was nearly midnight. Not fists, knuckles. Calm. Measured. Like a banker calling for a debt. Elias rose slowly, rifle in hand. Clara was already behind the curtain, knife clutched in her fingers. "Mr. Dorn," a voice called. Male. Unhurried. "We're not here for you." Elias cracked the door an inch and peered out. 3 riders waited in the moonlight. All wore dusters. All carried sidearms. One had a burned scar stretched across his cheek, a puckered line that ran from lip to ear like a melted ribbon. He smiled when he saw Elias. "We just want what's owed," the man said. She ran, but that don't change the sentence. Elias opened the door a little wider. "And what court passed that sentence?" "The court of the Lord, and the judgment of men," the scarred man replied, smiling wider. "She's a witch, Dorn. You know the law in Dry Fork. I know that burning a girl alive in a shack ain't justice." "She ain't a girl. She's a disease," the man hissed. "We let her live," she spreads. "Her father traded with savages. Raised her to speak their tongue. That's corruption. She poisons the soul of the territory." Elias didn't look back. "She's not going anywhere." Scarface nodded slowly. "Then neither are you." The first shot came from the hill. A warning crack. It shattered the lantern Elias had lit on the porch. Clara dragged him back inside as glass sprayed across the threshold. He slammed the door, threw the bolt, and shoved the table against it. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. Her eyes burned with a quiet rage. "How many?" he asked, crouched beside her. "More than 3. Maybe 6. Maybe more," she said. "They never come without backup." "Then we don't wait," he growled. They moved fast. Elias grabbed a pouch of bullets, his canteen, the dried meat sack from the rafters. Clara darted to the back, retrieving her shawl and slipping the knife into her boot. She didn't hesitate when he lifted the floorboard in the corner, revealing a narrow crawl space leading to a trench outside. Built for coyotes and worst-case scenarios. He had never used it until now. They emerged 50 yards from the cabin, crouched behind a line of scrub. The moon cast long shadows, and Clara blended into them like smoke. Elias followed her lead. She moved with purpose, feet finding soft soil, eyes always ahead. She was no helpless victim now, she was something else entirely. They crossed 2 ridges before the cabin went up in flames behind them. Elias turned, jaw clenched. Clara didn't stop walking. That was always going to happen. "We'll lose them in the canyons," Elias said. "South Pass." "No," she said, voice low. "They'll follow the river. They know every route I might take. They think like soldiers. But they fear what they don't understand." "Then where?" he asked. "There's a place," she said. "My father showed me. North of Hollow Rock. It's old Apache ground. No white man dares ride there, not even the bold ones." "You think that'll stop them?" She stopped walking and looked at him full in the face. "No. But it's where I stop running." They reached the edge of Hollow Rock by dawn. Their legs ached. Elias's shoulder throbbed. He'd taken a grazing bullet when they left the cabin, though he hadn't mentioned it. Clara saw the blood anyway, tearing her shawl to wrap it tight. "You should have left me there," she muttered as she pulled the knot. "I didn't save you to watch you fall apart later," he said, trying to grin through the pain. She didn't smile. But her fingers lingered a moment longer on his arm before letting go. By mid-morning, they reached the old ruins. Stone pillars, half buried in sand, marked the edge of sacred land. The wind shifted again, cooler now, whistling through rocks carved by centuries of spirit tales and quiet graves. They made camp beneath a hollowed arch, using sagebrush for cover. Elias built no fire. Clara sat beside him, legs tucked to her chest. "When they come," she whispered, "they'll bring fear. That's how they fight." "You ever been afraid?" Elias asked. "Every day since I was 12, she said. "But I learned that fear doesn't stop the sun from rising. It doesn't stop the ground from holding your weight. It only stops you." She met his gaze then, and for a long moment there was no desert, no pursuers, no pain. Just 2 souls carved by loss and stitched back together by something gentler, something that didn't yet have a name. A bird called in the distance. Clara turned toward it. "They're close," she said. "Tomorrow, maybe less." Elias loaded the rifle and handed her a second one, an old lever action. She took it without hesitation. "You shoot." "I aim," she replied. "Shooting's easy. Aiming's harder. Elias nodded. That night they did not sleep. They sat in silence, watching the moon pass over stones older than time. There was a peace in the waiting, in knowing there was nothing left to lose that hadn't already been taken. As the stars wheeled above them, Elias leaned back against the stone and said, almost too softly to hear, "If we make it through this, there's land north of the ridge. Rich soil. Creek runs year-round. I thought of moving there. Starting over." Clara said nothing at first. Then, "I was never given a place. Always borrowed it or fled from it. Maybe it's time I had one." He turned to look at her. She didn't return the glance. But her voice, low and steady, said more than her eyes ever could. "I'm tired of running, Elias. If we stand here, I need to know you'll stand with me." His reply was simple. "I already am." She nodded once and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to remember her strength. And far beyond the stone arch, the riders gathered again. The fire hadn't finished what it started. But neither had Clara. The sun rose over the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. Clara stood at the edge of the plateau, her silhouette sharp against the amber sky. Beside her, Elias adjusted the rifle strap across his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll be here soon," Clara said, her voice steady. Elias nodded. "We're ready." They had spent the night fortifying their position, using the natural contours of the land to their advantage. The ruins provided cover, and the narrow pass leading to their perch was the only accessible route for the approaching riders. As the morning light intensified, dust clouds appeared in the distance. The riders were coming. Clara crouched behind a boulder, her rifle resting on a flat stone. Elias took position nearby, his gaze fixed on the advancing figures. The first shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. One of the riders fell, his horse veering off course. Chaos ensued as the remaining men scrambled for cover. Elias fired again, his aim precise. Another rider dropped. Clara's hands were steady as she took her shot, hitting a third man. The attackers were now disoriented, their numbers dwindling. But then, a new figure emerged, a man clad in dark leather, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He rode with purpose, his movements calculated. Clara's breath caught. "That's him," she whispered. "The one who chained me." Elias's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then this ends now." The man dismounted, drawing 2 pistols. He advanced slowly, his eyes locked on Clara. "You should have burned," he called out. "But I'll finish it myself." Clara stepped out from behind the boulder, her rifle aimed at him. "You tried to kill me, but I survived. I won't run anymore." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can stop me?" Elias moved to flank him, but the man was quick, firing a shot that grazed Elias's arm. Elias stumbled, dropping his rifle. Clara fired, hitting the man in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall. He raised his pistol, aiming at Clara. A sudden movement, a blur from the side. Elias tackled the man, knocking the weapon from his hand. They struggled, fists flying. Clara approached cautiously, her rifle trained on them. The man broke free, pulling a knife. He lunged at Elias. Clara fired. The man collapsed, the knife slipping from his grasp. Silence settled over the canyon. Elias sat up, breathing heavily. Clara rushed to his side, checking his wound. "I'm fine," he said, wincing. "Thanks to you." They looked around. The remaining attackers had fled, leaving behind their fallen comrades. Clara stood, surveying the scene. "It's over." Elias nodded. "For now." They gathered their belongings, preparing to leave the canyon. As they descended the plateau, Clara glanced back at the ruins. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode in silence, the desert stretching out before them. In the distance, a new horizon awaited, a place to start anew. Their journey had been fraught with danger and pain, but they had found strength in each other. And as they rode into the unknown, they carried with them the scars of the past and the hope of a future forged together. "Sources," you said. "Sure." Here is section 4 of the cinematic frontier-style story titled Asterisk. A settler girl was chained in a cabin for 3 days and left to burn in the desert until a struggling rancher made her his world. Asterisk. This section is exactly 200 words, continuing the dramatic and immersive tone with focused character development and a satisfying yet open-ended conclusion. The wind had shifted. What was once a scorched silence now carried the scent of sagebrush and the faint murmur of distant hooves. Clara tightened her grip on the reins, riding beside Elias through a stretch of jagged rock formations. The desert behind them shimmered in the morning light, the aftermath of their stand against Holt still pulsing like a phantom bruise on the landscape. She didn't speak, but her posture had changed, less guarded, more upright. Something inside her had been set free the moment Holt collapsed in the dust. But freedom, she now understood, was never the end of a story. It was the beginning of another. Elias rode with a slight lean, his shoulder still wrapped in Clara's makeshift bandage. He bore the pain quietly, only grimacing when the trail forced a jolt through his body. Clara noticed, of course. She noticed everything now, the way he scanned their surroundings with more caution than before, the way he unconsciously shifted his body to shield her whenever they crossed exposed ground. It was instinct, not gallantry. She respected that. She didn't need rescuing anymore. But she'd be a liar if she said she didn't feel safer with him near. They reached a rise in the land that overlooked a narrow ravine filled with cottonwoods and the glimmer of a thin creek below. Clara drew in a breath. Water, real water. Shade. A place to rest. Elias nodded at her, silent agreement, and they guided their horses down the slope, hooves skittering on loose gravel. When they reached the creek, Clara dismounted first and knelt beside the water, splashing it on her sunburnt face. She watched her reflection ripple and vanish with each motion, the woman staring back at her no longer broken, but not quite whole either. Elias sat beneath a cottonwood, removing his hat and letting the shadows cool his sweat-lined brow. He glanced at her then, more deliberate than usual. "We could head north," he said after a long pause. "Toward the Montana line. Fertile land. Cooler weather. Folks don't ask so many questions up there." Clara ran her fingers through the water, weighing the words. A choice. For the first time in her life, no one was making it for her. She turned to face him, her voice soft but sure. "I don't want to run anymore. I want to build something. Even if it's just one cabin, one piece of dirt that's ours." He smiled faintly, the kind that crept up one side of his face. "You always this stubborn?" She smirked. "Only since I stopped being afraid." That night they camped beneath the cottonwoods. Elias fell asleep first, his breathing deep and even. Clara stayed up watching the stars crawl across the sky, thinking about the chains that once held her and the man who burned trying to bury her spirit. She pressed her palm against her chest, right where the memory ached most, and whispered a vow. No more fear. No more silence. The next morning brought smoke. It slithered through the trees like a dark omen, heavy and acrid. Clara was the first to stir, her senses snapping to alert. She woke Elias with a gentle nudge. He sat up instantly, eyes narrowing as he caught the scent. They climbed the ridge and saw it, columns of smoke rising from the east. Not wildfire. Controlled burns, too neat, too calculated. Someone was flushing them out. Elias muttered under his breath. He had friends. Clara's jaw tightened. Let's not wait to meet them. They packed in haste, riding hard through the narrow valley until the land opened into rolling grass and thick pine. The terrain shifted fast, from dry desert to foothills teeming with birdsong and whispering trees. But the threat behind them kept the air sharp. Every sound was suspect, every shadow a warning. By midday, they reached an abandoned homestead, just the skeleton of a barn and the shell of a cabin whose roof had caved in long ago. Yet the land was fertile, wildflowers growing defiantly through the cracks. Clara dismounted and walked the perimeter. The silence here felt different. Not threatening, but patient. Like something that had been waiting. Elias joined her, surveying the space. You thinkin' what I'm thinkin'? She nodded. We can fix it. Build it up again. He crouched beside a foundation stone, brushing away decades of dirt. Wouldn't be easy. And folks who come through here might not be friendly. I'm not asking for easy, she said. Just a chance. He rose and looked at her, long and slow. You'll have it. And so they began. Each day brought labor, hard, aching labor. Clara hauled wood with blistered hands, her back screaming at the weight of it. Elias sawed and hammered, often with one hand as his shoulder healed slower than expected. At night they collapsed beside the fire, muscles trembling, skin raw from sun and splinters. But the cabin took shape, and with it, something deeper grew, an unspoken bond forged through shared purpose. They didn't talk much about the past. Only what needed saying. Elias mentioned his brother once, a ranch lost to drought and debt, and Clara listened without interrupting. She told him about her mother's lullabies and how she sang them to herself in the cabin before the fire. Elias nodded, eyes heavy with something unspoken. That was enough. One morning, a stranger appeared at the edge of the trees. A rider, older, lean, with a hawk-like gaze. Elias stepped forward, hand near his holster. The man raised both hands in peace. Name's Finch, he called. Just passing through. Saw the smoke from your chimney. Clara stepped beside Elias, her posture tense but calm. We're not looking for trouble. Finch smiled, weathered and kind. Didn't think you were. Just wanted to say, it's good to see folks building again. He left them with a sack of flour and a warning. Men like Holt, they don't always die alone. Some carry their hate farther than you'd expect. As Finch rode off, Elias looked at Clara. He's right. We'll need to be ready. Clara met his gaze, unwavering. We already are. Autumn settled over the valley, golden and cool. The cabin now stood with a sturdy roof and a door that didn't creak. They added a corral for the horses, planted a row of beans near the stream. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. One evening, as the first frost rimmed the grass and the fire inside crackled warm and steady, Clara stood at the window watching the horizon. Elias approached, setting a steaming cup in her hand. You think they'll come? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Maybe. But they won't find the same girl they left in chains. She turned to face him, her voice quiet. And you? What will they find in you? He looked down at her, his eyes full of something fierce and fragile. They'll find the man who found his world when he thought he'd lost everything. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the silence between them said all that needed saying. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as fugitives or victims, but as people who had clawed their way back from the edge of ruin to build something worth protecting. And in that cabin, tucked deep in the wilderness where pain had once ruled, the slow, steady heartbeat of a new beginning echoed through the timber walls. Not loud, not fast, but real, alive.